Good morning, ladies and germs. This is your Ticker Guy update for the 25th. And yes, they are coronavirus germs. But guess what? They're not really any worse than all the other germs. Oh, wait. Denninger, you're crazy. You're going to get people killed. You got to social distance. We got to lock down the entire effing country. You're nuts. Am I? Am I really nuts? Go read my article from this morning, folks. You know, I'll tell you, the data doesn't support what we're doing. I know. There's a surge in New York. There's a hotspot in New York. Well, there is. Why is it that we weren't going crazy when swine flu was here in the United States? Oh, well, because it didn't overload the medical system. Folks, exponential growth models all produce bell curves. The fact is that suppression matters don't work. They never have. Let's go down a few facts, okay? First off, let us assume, just for the sake of argument, that this claim, and I've pointed this out before, but nobody wants to talk about this. You know, there's a scaremonger site, and by the way, I'm not going to name them, but you can find it. It's got a state by state thing for states that haven't done what they want, a you're all going to die date, an irreversible death date. Well, there's a little problem. A couple of those dates have just passed, and they didn't get the result they wanted. So now we're going to find out if these people were right or if they're wrong, because you predicted disaster. Okay, we're going to see if you get the disaster. If you don't get the disaster, are we going to hold these people to account? Are we going to take these people who told us that either we had to close the entire country, a la Bill Ackman, okay, and if the disaster predicted does not occur, remember, these folks have all argued, including Blix or whatever the fuck her name is, and including Fauci, they have all, during the beginning of this thing, as soon as they're all out there saying that we are going to have a cataclysm, that 1 million people in the United States, or even 10 million people in the United States, are going to die of this disease. They're not going to die because they just ordinarily die, because people die every day. They're going to die of COVID-19. That is going to happen, period. Well, I've already pointed out that I have a very, very close associate of mine, someone he's not my son, but he could be, in terms of, how close we are together and, the way we talk and hang out with each other and things like this. He's an adult. His grandfather succumbed a few days ago, and now the test that they ran on him at the time he died came back positive. They did not know he was positive for COVID before he passed. But this was a man who was extremely old, well into his 90s. He had several other serious comorbidities. You probably could have blown him over with a feather. Virtually any sort of disease likely had a very high probability of killing him. And he didn't have those comorbidities because he was stupid or had done dumb things. He didn't weigh 400 pounds or have, 14 different diseases as a result of his lifestyle choices. He just had comorbidities because he was in his 90s. And that's what happens when you get into very, very old age, is that your immune system gets compromised, you get compromised. The things that you used to be able to do without any problem become kind of hard. And 10 or so years ago, he and his wife used to come down here and put their camper in Destin and hang out on the beach and, have a good time. Well, in the last several years, neither of them have been up to doing that because they just, they're physically too frail to be able to do that sort of thing. Now, traveling around in an RV is not very strenuous, okay, but they just didn't feel good enough about it. Well, he died. And then after he died, the test comes back, he's positive for COVID-19. Well, did COVID kill him? I don't know that that's the case. Okay? In Italy, we are seeing all these people that are dying and they're positive for COVID, and everyone's saying, but COVID's killing all these old people in Italy, and it's killing, and by the way, it's killing a few young people too. Well, all the young people that have died in Italy have had serious pre-existing problems, cancer patients and things like this. Hey, listen, if you don't know anybody that's ever had cancer, I'll tell you what. It's not cool, especially when you're taking chemo or radiation, because it plays hell with your immune system. And if you get something else, no matter what it is, it could be something as simple as the common cold. While you're being treated for that, the odds of it killing you is pretty high. So this is not surprising. Secondly, we've got all these people, all these celebrities, all these super people now. Prince Charles. I've got, hey, they've got coronavirus. Folks, these folks, yes, I get it. They travel more, they interact with more people than than the ordinary common person. But think about how many of them there are as a percentage of the common population. It's not very many. How many NBA basketball players are there? For every guy who sits up in an air traffic control tower and stares at his screen all day, there's 10 bartenders, servers, and Uber drivers, all three of whom have much more contact with the general public, all three of whom have no tribe, if you will, by comparison, in terms of little clusters of infection, right? So if this thing was dropping people like flies the way they're saying, where are all those cases? Well, and by the way, where are the deaths? They're not happening. So, Governor Cuomo screams, oh my God, we're going to run events. Well, Governor Cuomo, years ago, canceled the purchase of about 16,000 ventilators. Why did he cancel the purchase? Well, you'd have to go ask him, but he did. And this was after a study was done that said that not a pandemic necessarily, but even a really severe flu season could screw the state of New York and New York City specifically. And that these things ought to be held in reserve because bad things could happen. Good morning. Something bad happened. All right. The other thing is, as I have repeatedly pointed out, if after Diamond Princess you did not, as a virologist and as an immunologist or whateverist, doctor, if you did not adjust your model for what actually happened on that Petri dish, then you are a hack. If you are making public policy pronouncements and influencing whether or not people shut things down, and you did not fully account for what happened on Diamond Princess in your recommendations. In other words, if you can't trace the step function that you put into there when Diamond Princess occurred, you're worse than a hack. You deserve to be hauled out of your office by your hair. And everybody who you advised also needs to be hauled out of their office by their hair. Because the facts are this, folks. On Diamond Princess, a floating Petri dish, which we have now traced how the infection was getting into people. Because remember, they quarantined everybody in their cabins. I don't know how many of you have ever been on a cruise ship. I've taken several cruises with my daughter. They are floating Petri dishes. But in essentially every case, the way that these things get transmitted among the passengers is the galley crew. And the reason that happens is that most of these people are shit eaters, for real, okay? They come from third world countries. All the people that they employ, other than maybe the captain, the first officer, the deck crew, those people are from first world nations. Nobody else is. These firms all sail under flags of convenience, and they hire people that are making $5 a day. Now, you may like that business model. You may think it sucks. Whatever you may think about it, the fact of the matter is none of these people come from countries that have sanitation standards and are inculcated into decent personal hygiene like we have here in the United States. None. Zero. That's just the way it is, folks. And so if you get something that is spreadable through that sort of a method, it's going to be a disaster. God forbid, if you actually had people in the United States that were not immune to polio and you got polio into one of those ships, you'd kill people and paralyze them. It would be absolutely outrageous. If you took the world that we had before the polio vaccine and you put them on a cruise ship and you employed people from these countries as they do, and you put that ship out to sea for a week, it would come back and half the people on the boat would be on the route to paralysis. And that's no bullshit. That's the truth, folks. That's the way this kind of thing works. And most of the rest are probably have already gotten it too, and they just are asymptomatic. They're going to get it, and it's going to get them. So Diamond Princess goes out and does its cruise, and when they come back, they get quarantined. And so they sit in this Petri dish, and they get locked down in their cabins. Now think about this, folks. You're locked down in your cabin. There's no way for you to transmit the virus to somebody else in a different cabin. You could give it to your cabin mate. Hopefully that's your wife or your girlfriend. You both get to at least do something useful with all of your time. And, God forbid it's not, right? Two guys traveling together and they're not gay. That would be a bummer. Anyway, but you're being brought your food, and then your stuff is being taken away. Well, any virus that you deposit on the dishes is going to end up down in the galley, and it's going to immediately go through their rather industrial-style cleaning machines, their dishwashers. And if you've never seen those in a commercial environment, you have no clue what they look like and what they do. They're steam-driven. There is not a snowball's chance in hell. And folks, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, it's a really good thing. It's just very sanitary. But in addition, one of the reasons they use these machines in this kind of a way is because there's a speed problem. You need to get those dishes turned so that they can be used again. It's absolutely necessary. But there is not a snowball's chance in Hades that virus anything is surviving a trip through one of those machines. Not happening. All right, so where's this coming from? Well, the galley crew, all right, which is bringing your food up to you. And yet, everybody on the boat didn't get it. We had a very significant percentage of the people on that boat who tested seropositive for the virus, not for the antibodies, for the virus. They weren't doing antibody surveys. They tested positive for the virus, but they never developed symptoms. And there were mathematical models run after this. I've looked at them. I ran my own at the time, and I said that the test positive yet never get symptoms rates are probably running somewhere around 30%. Well, guess what? The paper comes out and it says somewhere that the boundary is somewhere between 20 and 40. Yeah, and that's and that's with the reasonable confidence. I didn't like the confidence interval on that. I don't like the confidence interval on my calculations. It sucks. But is it substantial? Is it anywhere near zero? No. All right, then you have, how many people died? Well, a couple. But wait, there were how many? There were 3,000 people on that boat? Where's all the deaths? And this, by the way, in a very heavily skewed older population. And then there's another problem. So we had a few people that tested positive and died. We had some people that tested positive and got sick. We had a significant number of people who tested positive and didn't get sick. And then we had a very large percentage of the population who didn't test positive and didn't get sick. And how in the hell did that happen? How? Folks, this isn't the Bayesian kind of distribution where you have the nice little bell curve. These people were being directly seeded with the virus out of the galley. How did they not get sick? They were exposed. How can that not happen if this thing is how it appears to be? And listen, Arnott, the basic multiplication factor, that there ain't no arguing with that, folks. That is what it is, all right? I mean, we've got plenty of evidence that this thing is, in terms of being able to pass it around, if you're susceptible, it is very virulent. So how are they not getting ill? Well, there's two possibilities, one of which is that they weren't exposed, which is bullshit, and the second is they were immune. Now think about this. When did Diamond Princess happen? Way before the lockdowns, way before the panic. And yet, how'd that happen? How'd that happen? Did you think about that, folks? No, you didn't, did you? How'd that occur? Well, and yet, I'm looking at these numbers out of places like Dade County and Broward, where they have enough cases for it to matter. And there should be, well, depending on which model you use and how you plug the numbers into it, you get widely varying results. But none of them end up with a couple hundred cases. All of them end up with somewhere between 1,500 and 10,000 cases per county. In other words, New York. But it hasn't happened. And remember, New York, they did their thing, but Florida just slammed down restrictions on the beach and everything else about a week ago. In fact, almost exactly a week ago is when it happened. They didn't close beaches until then. They had their quote unquote social distancing had been going on for a few days. The previous weekend it wasn't going on. The previous weekend I was in a bar having beers, watching fights. There was no social distancing. The place was packed. Where are all the cases? Where are all the cases here in Okaloosa County? I sat in a bar. We had a St. Patty's Day pub crawl. The place was jammed, for Christ's sakes. I went into one of the joints to get a drink. It took me 20 minutes to get one drink. The place was absolutely effing packed. I was out all night. The entire town was there. That, by the way, is what usually happens. Well, you know what? It's now been almost 2 weeks. It will be 2 weeks this weekend. Where are all the community spread cases? They didn't happen. Then you got another problem. Mexico went ahead with they had music festival. 70,000 people that had bought pre-sale tickets, God knows how many at the door, in Mexico City, 2 days. Where's the explosion? Where's the kaboom? I was promised an earth-shattering kaboom. Oh, that creature stole my PU-236 space modulator. There was no kaboom. Where's the kaboom? Now, do we have a problem in places like New York? Yeah, we do. Do we have a problem in places like Washington State? Yeah, we do. Washington State, yep, there's an issue. Are we seeing a spike in people showing up in the ER in the hospitals in Michigan? Yep, we sure are. Are we seeing the same sort of thing happen in Chicago? Yep, we are. But where are we on the curve? That's the most important thing, folks, because this is the way all exponential series behave, every last one of them. What you simply must understand, the old ticker I wrote years ago about the lily pads. It's kind of funny how this works. And, you ought to go back and read that article, folks, because it applies to viruses just like it applies to everything else. Okay? For those of you that don't remember it, just a couple of days before you're all dead because the pond is covered in lilies, and as a result, there's no oxygen exchange, and if you're a fish, you're fucked. Okay? Because the sun is necessary for the algae, which supplies the food for the fish, and the lilies grow using the urea and that the fish excrete. That's what they use as a fertilizer, and of course they multiply and cover the pond. 2 days before every fish in the pond dies, there's only 12% of the pond that's covered, and 12% doesn't sound so bad, does it? In fact, it kind of looks like a little bit of shade, a little welcome shade on what would otherwise be a very hot day. And you get a couple more days down the list, and holy crap, we're at 50% coverage. And at the next doubling, you're done. You're dead. You're all dead. Can you commit mass lilicide fast enough in order to get out of that box? Well, probably not. But here's the thing about viruses is that they follow bell curves. When you get to the point that immunity is high in the population, they stop distributing themselves because R0, the attack model, the way it works is that there's the model anyway, is that everybody is a homogeneous group, and therefore everybody has equal chance of coming in contact with somebody else, and you come in contact with somebody that has had the virus and is immune, or they're immune because they had a related virus. Whatever the reason is, if you come in contact with somebody and you can't transmit it to them, you used up one of your attack types, one of your attack points. Okay? And when that number goes below 1.0, in other words, I have the virus, I infect less than one person, invariably, you will trend down towards zero. Now, you won't get to zero because there will be little pockets of infection. But in the real world, it doesn't behave this way. In the real world, it's a multivariate analysis. In the real world, there's all sorts of little pockets where people get things and they pass them around to their friends. Now, in a large city, not so much, okay, because all of these social circles. I'll just give you an example. There's a handful of people that I hang out with, drinking establishments and running and things like this, and it's not very large, okay? It is a, it's a group of people, but it's not half the town, right? And we all kind of hang out with each other. We run together as a group, although you're not really running with a group. That's stupid, okay? I mean, anybody suggests that has rocks in their head. I don't know that, without a little effort, you're probably not intentionally maintaining 6 feet of distance at all times. But you are certainly not, kissing each other while you're doing it, duh. And you're breathing hard, so maybe you're expelling a little more particulate than you otherwise would. But generally speaking, this is a relatively cohesive group. So if somebody in that group gets something that's easily communicable, it's going to go around. And then I have a lot of intersection with the people that I'll sit at the bar and have a beer with afterwards. Okay. So here's the thing, though. There's some leakage between that and other people in the general public. In other words, I go to the grocery store, right? Or I go to the Walmart or whatever. And I don't try to have close personal contact with people at those places, but I do have some contact. And so there's some leakage between these groups. In large cities, as soon as you get mass transit involved, the leakage is massive because I get on a subway train and there's 400 people on that subway train that I don't know them and I'll never see them again. Or maybe I will, but I won't recognize it. Okay? And the cross-pollination is large enough there that city really does kind of behave as one cohesive group for the purposes of these models. But in smaller towns and rural areas, it doesn't work like that. Your sphere of influence, if you will, in terms of spreading things around might be centered around your church, might be centered around your running group or the people you hang with at the bar. And there might be 2 or 3 of those, and so there's some cross-pollination, but it's not the way it is in major metros. All right, it's just there's an idealized model, and then there's the real world. I guess that's the best way to put it. And this is why you have hot spots like L.A. and New York, especially New York. New York is also a major international arrival center. People come in there, and on top of that, they hang out in New York. They come into New York and they hang out there for a while before they go on to wherever they're going. Point being this, folks, we have a virus that has behaved in ways that all of the epidemiologists and virologists, and this is under fairly decently controlled conditions, specifically Diamond Princess, behaved in ways that all these people tell you don't happen. But they did. It did behave that way. So you must, regardless of what you think should happen, when it doesn't, in a closed system, you must change your model. You must change your thinking. If not, you are unfit to be in service of the public. You are unfit. You are a hack. Whether you're a hack because you're singularly focused in one place and you just can't think outside the box, or whether you're a hack because you're motivated by something else, doesn't make a difference. You have no business being anywhere near the levers of power. You have no business giving advice to those people who are, because you are not looking at the facts. You're not a scientist anymore. You can't claim scientific anything. You can't claim letters after your name unless they're piled higher and deeper. This is reality. Look, folks, we have something that has not happened before, okay? And we are going to try to commit national suicide if we don't stop this. Now, how do you get to a model that is consistent with what we know, with what are facts? Well, oral polio. Who remembers this? Who's in their 50s? I don't remember when they stopped using it, actually, because it didn't matter to me until I had a kid. And when she got her round of childhood shots, which, by the way, are, hey, listen, MMR, mumps, measles, rubella, 3 really serious diseases. All right? They are no bullshit diseases. Chickenpox may be an annoyance for virtually everybody, but mumps and measles and rubella are not. And then there's polio. Polio was a horrifying disease. And then they came up with a way to make a vaccine for it. And the way they did it was they took the virus, the real deal, and they passed it through non-human cells at a very carefully controlled temperature. Rather interesting. I mean, you study how this was developed. It's fascinating. All right. I mean, you're talking about real brainiacs here. All right. I mean, man. But what you ended up with, and what was in that thing that they gave you to drink, was a live vaccine. It was live. What was in there, the virus that was in there was live, but it was attenuated. And you drank it, and you didn't get polio, but your body recognized that as a foreign thing and made antibodies. And those antibodies hung around because they were close enough to the real deal, because they were triggered by the real deal, that if you then came in contact with shit, which, by the way, fecal oral is how that was spread, okay? If you got the real deal, you didn't get sick. You didn't get polio. We still had to reach, with a 5-to-1 ratio, we had to reach about 80% penetration in the general population before polio stopped being a problem. But we got there. Now, they then, down the road, there was a problem, though, with this vaccine. It's an attenuated live vaccine, and about 1 in a million people, somewhere between 1 in a million and 1 in 2 million, that took this vaccine actually got polio because their particular genomic combination, along with this attenuated vaccine, wasn't attenuated quite enough. And so they actually got polio and they got paralyzed. All right. And that, boy, oh man, those were sad stories. And if you want to know where all of the yelling and screaming and hollering that we have about protection for vaccine makers under the law, they can't be sued. You have to go through a federal claims program, yada, yada. If you want to know where it came from, that's where. Because every now and then, someone who took the oral polio vaccine would get polio. And yet, virtually every parent gave their kid that vaccine. Schools required it. Everybody required it. You had to get to that 80% immunity before community transmission went away. And we did. And we still do. Well, now we have an injected one, which is a killed virus. It can't give you the disease. You cannot get polio from it. However, if you're challenged by the virus after you've had the injected version, you don't get polio, but you can crap it out in your feces. Now, that's a problem if you're in an area that doesn't have herd immunity, because if you run into somebody who is not immune and they come in contact with your feces and you have an active attempted infection, which is not going to make you sick, they can get the real disease. This, by the way, doesn't bother people much in places where white man sanitation rules, because we flush our shit down the toilet. But it does matter in places like Africa. And so in places like that, and the other thing is, the injected version is about 5 times as expensive. It's harder to make. So guess what? Guess what happens? In those places, you either give people both versions of the vaccine. You give them the injected one first, then you give them the oral one. The oral one doesn't, if you have that one, you don't shed in your feces. So you'd give them the oral one to stop them from accidentally infecting unvaccinated people. All right? And the injected one is for them. So you give them 2 vaccines, one after the other. And that's the way this works. Well, guess what? The virus that we have going around now behaves an awful lot like an attenuated live vaccine, doesn't it? Think about it. Except one that wasn't finished. One that wasn't intended to be used yet. Now, I want to add another piece to this. This very process is used with coronaviruses in animals. In veterinary medicine, there are coronaviruses. They infect animals. they're quite bad. They cause quite serious problems. And so there are viruses, both inactivated and attenuated, that are used as vaccines in animal husbandry. These are no bullshit. This is a real deal. The problem is they have to continually be reapplied because the immunity they grant is not permanent. And in addition to that, the attenuated ones seem to work better. The inactivated ones don't last as long. The immunity doesn't last as long. It requires more frequent redosing. Well, that's kind of a bummer, all right? But in animals, that's, it is what it is. We do it. Why? Because you don't want your chickens or whatever to fall over dead or get severely ill. They're not marketable if that happens, or they die, and then you make no money. So we use these things with animal husbandry. These diseases are real in animal populations, folks. But think about this. All this screaming about how we're going to come up with a vaccine. We're going to come up with a vaccine. We're going to come up with a vaccine. In the animal world, permanent immunity has not been found. All right? So no, we're not going to come up with a vaccine. But the process by which people, at least in all probability, but the process by which these vaccines are made in the animal husbandry business and the veterinary practice business is more or less the same. The inactivated, the attenuated ones anyway, is more or less the same kind of way that they make oral polio. So why is it unreasonable to believe that a virology lab was working on this kind of thing and it got out? Not intentionally, but it got out. It got into an animal population, reassorted itself, and ended up infecting people. Is that crazy? We play with these things all the damn time. And guess what? So does China. And where did this start in China? In Wuhan. And what do they have there? A level 4 lab. And what did they do when they found out that this was starting to circulate in large volume in their population and get people sick? What was the first thing that they did? They destroyed the evidence. We know this. This is published. They destroyed the evidence. They wouldn't let our people in from the CDC and other places, and they destroyed the evidence. Everyone says, well, if they'd been more forthcoming earlier, maybe we would have avoided all these bad things that would have. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. I don't have any idea. But ask yourself why. Because you know what? If this thing was conclusively traced, because they had a virological sample at that lab that they were working on, and it happens to be the same serotype as, or very closely related to what got out in Wuhan, and then started circulating and got throughout the world, well, we'd know exactly where it came from, wouldn't we? But see, here's the thing. If that had occurred, if that's the truth on this thing, we'll eventually figure it out. If the truth is that when you get down to it, this thing has a silent attack rate that is extremely high, which, by the way, is what the Oxford paper predicts. The Oxford paper says that up to 50% of the people in the UK have already had it and they're immune. Well, if that's the case, it's probably about the same for us. It explains Diamond Princess. It explains it exactly. It explains why Japan did not have a detonation of cases. It explains why South Korea was able to control it, and once they relaxed their restrictions to some degree, it did not come roaring back. It explains why China was able to control it. They did their lockdown, but guess what? Then they found out that their population was mostly immune, at least to a sufficient degree that the remaining outbreaks would be at a nuisance level, or maybe even a serious nuisance level. And yeah, there'll be people who will die, but it isn't going to kill 4% of the population, 3% of the population, 2% of the population. It's not going to kill anything like that. And it's not going to here either. It's not going to in Italy. Where are all the excess deaths? Folks, I want you to look at this chart. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this. I want you to look at this chart. You see that nice little line there? Okay, very nice little line. Looks really impressive. Well, guess what? Why is the red line curving down? This is recent data, folks. People die in Italy all the time. They're an old population. They have all kinds of comorbidities. And during previous years, their excess morbidity and mortality in particular, if you track that, Guess what? Eurostats tracks it. European Union tracks it. You know why? Because it goes into economic models. It actually is quite important in economic models. And that data so far in that compilation is a couple of weeks behind it. Remember, Italy has been, supposedly their grounds, their death rate's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. Everybody over there is dying, damn it. Well, okay. So we need another couple of weeks before we know whether or not that death rate is so much excess of what you'd expect. What if it's not? Does it matter why you die? Does it matter if you die while you're positive for COVID? No, all that matters is whether COVID was the reason you died. If you die and you were going to die anyway, whether you had COVID or not, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. You're still dead. What matters is excess mortality, folks. Are we really getting all that much of it? Are we getting some in places like New York? Yeah, we are. But is it the sort of mass casualty event that people are talking about? Do we really have a 2, 3, 4% mortality rate in the United States? No, we're not. We're not. And if we find out, and this is very important, folks, if we find out that we have had 50% of the population in New York City has been exposed to the virus, they have antibodies. Okay? Take the population of New York and divide that into the number of people who have died, and even double it, because we're not done with the people that are going to end up in the hospital and going to die. And tell me whether or not you're scared with that number, that percentage. Does that number scare you? If you just take it by the number of positive tests in New York City, yeah, I'm sure it does scare you. But what if a huge percentage of the population has had the disease? They had it. They had no symptoms whatsoever. Nothing that was worth even calling a doctor, even thinking about doing anything more than, maybe taking, maybe you took some NyQuil for an evening. That was the worst thing that you did, was you swallowed one of them little doser cups of NyQuil 1 or 2 nights. And you went about your day, and it was coronavirus. And you've recovered. You've got antibodies. Well, then you had coronavirus. What if that's the truth? That is a hypothesis, which is all it is without serological testing, but it's a hypothesis that fits the facts everywhere in the world so far. And I'm not the only one saying this, folks. I've been saying it since Diamond Princess started. But you know what? I'm going to put a link up for you. That is from an actual subject matter expert, a real no bullshit subject matter expert out of Switzerland. And he is cataloging all the other people who are making similar statements. Most of them have letters after their name. I don't have any letters after my name, but I can look at math. Why do I recognize patterns like this? Because it's what I do. It's what I've done pretty much all the way along the line. I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but it's why I can sit down and write something like Home Daemon that does home control. I don't have to sit down and do a flow chart and all these complicated data structure plans on paper and and make sure that I've got all. I can do this stuff in my head. That's how I do it. That's how I've consistently done it. The entire customer management system that MCSNet ran on, the whole thing, I wrote over a long weekend, because the previous one that we had, that was an adaptation of another product for another line of industry, was getting overloaded and wasn't working very well. And I could have brought in a team of people. I could have had a bunch of my guys. We all sit around a room. We all do the formal design, formal analysis, like you always hear is the right way to do it, right? You got your team, and then everybody gets their piece of it, and they go off and they do, and they do whatever. All right, it's a complex system. This is not just has to do billing and invoicing and tracking and things like that. It also has to directly interact with authentication, so that when somebody goes to sign in, the system knows whether they paid their bill or whatever have you. Okay? So think about this, folks. Think about this. So Friday night, I lock my office door. And I tell people, I got a sign on there, if the building's not on fire and you knock on this door, you're fired. By Monday morning, we had a brand new customer management system that did the entire thing. When we opened for business Monday, and the normal people came in for customer service, they had it. It was working. It was functional. From scratch, with a database back end. There was not a single line of code that existed prior to that time. I did the same thing at VideoCart for the cart management system in the stores when the so-called management-approved way of doing things was very clearly going to be late, and we couldn't afford it to be late. So I locked myself in my office, and over the space of, I think that one took 4 or 5 days, and ate a lot of Chinese takeout food, and did the same thing. Never got any credit for it. Was it perfect? No, it wasn't perfect, but by God, it worked. Home Daemon, same deal. The AKCS conferencing software everybody uses to read my blog and make comments, same deal. I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, folks, but it is. I can look at large data sets and pick out patterns in them, and I can design data sets with all of the interconnections and the patterns and links that have to be there. I may miss something here and there, but I can do this without having to write them out on a piece of paper. I don't got 27 pieces of paper on my desk when I'm doing this kind of work. I never have. And as soon as I saw the Diamond Princess information, because, folks, look, exponential math is not complicated, okay? You should have learned how this stuff works in high school. You didn't have to take calculus. This is something that every single American should understand at its core. Now, looking at a data set and saying, yeah, it don't fit, maybe that's not something that everybody in America is going to do, okay? And that's fine. But we pay people a lot of money with a lot of letters after their name, that's their job. And when you look at a data set and you have a model and the data set doesn't fit in the model's wrong. You can't argue with what actually happened. If I record information from the field and I've got a model that says this is what's going to occur, and that model is wrong, empirically, I have the data and it's not, then my job is to figure out where the model failed. It's not to say we're going to take this action because the model says this is going to happen. It already didn't happen. That's all there is, folks. That's where we are today. We're doing things based on models that have failed to verify. And everyone's saying they're going to. Millions of people are going to die. They're going to die because we're going to have these spikes, and there's going to be 100 people that need a ventilator, and for every one that we have, we're going to need 20,000 ventilators in New York City, and we've only got 1,500, and the rest of those people are going to die. Okay, may I ask, of those people who get put on ventilators, how many survive? What if the answer is that 9 times out of 10, or, my God, what happened in Wuhan? The data in Wuhan says 95% of the time you die. I don't care if it's 90% or 95%. Those odds suck. If you have data that says that if I end up on a ventilator because of this virus, 90% of the time I go out of there in a box, do you buy more ventilators? What are you, insane? What sort of bullshit is that? No. We find ways that you don't need a ventilator. We don't slow it down. What does that change? So I come into the hospital tomorrow because you slowed it down. I don't come today when it was overloaded. I come tomorrow when it's not overloaded. I still end up on the vent, and 9 times out of 10, I still go home in a box. Are you crazy? These people are crazy. They are flat out insane. You got a model that doesn't verify. You're still acting as though it's going to. It hasn't. You know, folks, does anybody realize that this very same thing has gone on with global warming? By God, we were going to lose all of our beaches by now. And then there was a flattening and it didn't happen. The acceleration that was predicted, the exponential curve, didn't happen. But we still got our models. And by God, they will. The model's not wrong. The model's not wrong. The model's not wrong. The model's not wrong. Yes, it is. We knew that 10 years ago. We got the same thing going on with this virus. You have an epidemiological model that says that this is what's going to happen. Diamond Princess happens. We actually we create a human petri dish, a human experiment, okay, where everybody on that boat should have gotten that bug. every single person. Oh yeah, there'd be an outlier here or there. There'd be the guy who's one of the electricians in the back that maintains the generator off the diesels, and he doesn't get it. Okay, but essentially everybody on that damn boat should have gotten that bug, and they all should have gotten sick too. Now we can argue over what percentage of them would have died, but every one of them should have gotten sick, clinically ill. It didn't happen. A significant percentage of them, in fact, a huge number of them, a unexplainable percentage for a population that has no immunity, didn't get it at all. They never tested positive. How? How is that possible? It's not possible. Your model's wrong, folks. The thing that is generating all this fear and all this screaming and all these the model's wrong. Go back and fix it. Come up with something, an explanation, and then a modification of your model that fits what's actually observed. We saw that. I've got that for Diamond Princess. And by the way, when I do that, it fits Japan, it fits South Korea, it fits China, and believe it or not, it looks like it fits Italy. That Italy, when you go back and you look at the actual excess mortality, it's something like 12% of the reported deaths. Is that bad? Well, yeah, it's a bummer, but it's not worse than an extraordinarily bad flu season. All the rest of those people died of something else. They died with coronavirus, but they didn't die of coronavirus. And yet, my God, we're scared. You know, I would like Fauci and all these other scolds. You give me your model. You go ahead and you send it to me. Send me your Excel. You know, I don't care what you put it in. Put it in Excel, whatever. And the problem, folks, there's as I said, there's population problem with that. Okay, with using something like Excel because it treats the country as one population, and that's not true. All right, but you know, you got all these scolds. They're all running around out there. Okay, fine. I'm good with all that. I'm good with all that. But the model didn't verify. So why are we still using it? Why are we still making public health decisions based on it? We shouldn't be. We shouldn't have been from the beginning. As soon as it failed to verify, we should have changed our model to fit the facts. That's what you're supposed to do. But it's not what we're doing. So, is Trump going to unlock the economy? Is he going to say, hey, enough of this bullshit after this 15 days? I don't know. You know what? He potluck committed for those 15 days. All right, I don't know if he has realized that he was wrong, that the model didn't verify, or if he knew it at the time. I doubt he knew it at the time because he's listening to people who are running something that didn't work. But maybe somebody got to him and said, hey, listen, there's a ever-growing group of virologists and epidemiologists that have stepped back from the original predictions because the models haven't been verifying, and all of a sudden they're realizing that, hey, this is not the correct approach because it doesn't make any damn sense. Secondly, if anybody had thought critically about how these things work, if that original model was correct, you slam the door down on this thing and you think you got it. What you did was you concentrated all the nastiest strains of the virus into the hospitals. And you killed off all the other ones because you locked down the public. And then what happens when you release the locks? You have not reached herd immunity. So guess what? The old exponential series reasserts itself, and the strains that you do not want to select for in the population are the ones that remain because they're the ones that are in the hospitals, the most serious cases. We learned that one in 1918 and 1919. Yeah. Anyway. I'm your ticker guy. Can we have some sanity here, please?